Okay, so we were talking about what it was like to be in a family with 4 siblings, and you said that you didn't really feel that that was the case in some ways because you had older siblings that...
Yes, 2 of them were, there was a 8-year gap between the first 2 children born and the last 3 of us. I don't know if my mother just had enough of my dad and you know, just would not be intimate with him, or what the story is. But they were married more or less by the time I was 5 or 6, and essentially I became a babysitter then, because one had, my brother, oldest brother, had 7 children. So I became a babysitter, and that sort of satisfied my interest in having any children of my own.
Okay.
That was enough. I like kids, but I didn't want any of my own.
Okay, schooling.
I went to Bellwood Annis High School, graduated in 1966. Then I started, I wasn't planning on going to college. No one in our family had gone to college. No one in my either parents' families had gone to college. I came from a very low-income, blue-collar background, both sides of my family. But my shorthand teacher, because I was taking business courses to be a secretary in high school, she talked me and talked my dad into having me go to college because she felt I should. And so I went to Penn State Altoona campus for a year, and surprisingly received the Outstanding Freshman of the Year award for having the highest GPA, which did surprise me because I wasn't used to competing in a larger swimming pool, so to speak. Bellwood Annis was a very small school, 105, I think, in my graduating class. I had to stop after the first year at Penn State, though, because my father was hurt on the railroad and there was no income coming in. So I withdrew, and I got a job with Bell Telephone as a long-distance operator. And I worked there for about 5 years. And this was back when it was legal for Bell Telephone to hire only women. Only women, you know, and that was perfectly legal. And it was an okay job. I worked after the first year, I worked in the evening hours. You work, let's say, 5 to 11. Have a half-hour break, and you get paid for 8 hours, even though you're really only working 5.5. And then eventually, though, I ended up leaving Altoona for reasons based on discrimination and blacklisting and outing me of the Altoona Police Force.
Well, we want to step there and let's tell this whole story from the beginning.
Okay. Well, after working at Bell Telephone, and I decided to resume my college goals, then I went to Mount Aloysius College and was majoring in criminal justice, because that was supposed to be an up-and-coming field, especially for women. And this was early 1970s, and I did very well. I graduated summa cum laude with a 2-year degree in criminal justice. And at that time, the Altoona Police Department had an ad in the paper. They were hiring 4 police officers. And of course, there were no women on it, but you had to take the civil service test, the local civil service test. And there were about 205 people applying. And when you would go to pick up the application, it was very obvious, you know, that they were not ready for any females, because they'd say, "Is this for your brother?" Or, you know, when you would say to them, "No, it's for me," there'd always be this laughing and smart, snide remarks to someone in the background about, "Oh, we have another one." You know, I would say there were probably maybe 15 women who applied out of the 204 applicants. And I scored high up on, very high up on the test. And so I think they felt compelled to interview me. They did interview me, and they did not offer me the job, though. And they didn't offer the job to any women, period. And so with the encouragement of some friends, and you have to realize this is in the 70s, and women's rights movement is prime and really strong. And so I did file a gender-based complaint on my gender as a female with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. Well, that turned out to be a huge regret on my part, because through the Human Relations Commission's investigation, it was discovered that the Altoona police bypassed veterans who had the extra points, male veterans, because these jobs apparently had already been known who they were going to be given to. The civil service exam, in other words, was just going through the formalities, essentially. Well, that hit the newspaper and the media. And of course, the Altoona police and the mayor and everything needed someone to really come down on. And if it hadn't been for me, none of this would have come out about the veterans. So I was the bitch who caused all this trouble. And I say bitch because things became horrendous. I had gone to one city council meeting where I spoke up, and that was on TV. There were articles continually in the newspaper. But what the police did then, they created their own dossier, they called it, on me personally. And then they outed me publicly. And I would get death threats in the middle of the night or even in the daytime walking down the street, you know, from people who were so angry because I was the one who caused the disclosure of these veterans being bypassed to hire other people, you know, and it was horrendous. I stayed in Altoona, I guess, for about a year. I couldn't get a job doing anything. I mean, cleaning toilets in a hotel. No one would hire me. No one. The blacklisting was just horrendous. And they even said it to my face at one point. I went over to the office of the police and the mayor and was starting asking questions. And they said to me, I will never forget, a police officer, he was like high up, a lieutenant, and he's sitting back in his chair with his legs spread wide open, you know, kind of that, my testicles are huge and you're this awful female. And he said, I'll tell you right now, he said, you can take that degree you have and you can wipe your ass with it because you'll never get a job in that field and we'll make sure of it. And they did.
How old were you at this point?
At this point, I was about 25, 26. And so after a year of not being able to get a job and relying on some help from my mother and sharing expenses with a roommate in a very modest apartment, and the harassment, the phone calls, the death threats, all that kind of stuff, I decided to move to Harrisburg. And I moved here with a gay male friend. And we came down here and within a few years, I realized that the blacklisting did not stop at the criminal justice field.
Now, hold just a minute.
Okay.
We want to step back. You say you were outed.
Mm-hmm.
How could that happen? Well, tell me your story of coming out to yourself first.
Well, coming out to myself happened. I met a woman at a bar. And I had gone there more or less out of curiosity. I mean, because I myself dated men. I even got engaged 5 different times in my 20s up to about 25 or 26. But I think it was mostly peer pressure because Bell Telephone, again, was all female, and women would be coming in showing off their engagement rings, and the older women would be teasing me, and Nancy, when are we going to see one of those on your hand, and so forth and so on. You know, so, but I started realizing, although I loved these different people I was engaged to, I didn't love them in that way, that romantic way, and I wasn't sexually excited about them. You know, I cared about them. They were all nice guys. And so then I went to a bar, because I heard about this. I can't remember how I heard of it, because Altoona is really conservative. I'm surprised there even was a bar. And I met a woman there, and we dated for a while. She essentially brought me out. Okay, and that, I was 27 then.
And how did other people find this out?
The
Like the police
did a background. They would basically have people go out and find everything they could find on me, just as though, like probably the MacArthur era. How do they find out what people belong to or whatever? I mean, they just went out and created this stuff, and by talking to people who knew me and didn't know me well, but voluntarily then gave them, oh yeah, she's in a relationship with so and so and whatever. And then that came out publicly in the newspaper and on the radio, and all as part of their continued defense of why they didn't hire me,
How was your mom responding to all of this?
My mother, I don't think she grasped how harmful it was to me. I don't think she grasped how harmful, even though she herself had gone through a very rough time when she filed for divorce against my father. And she was raising the last three of us on her own, and even her own family essentially cut her off. They wouldn't talk to her, they wouldn't help her out financially. She tried to support us on jobs, factory jobs, like a shoe factory, chicken factories.
What date are we talking about here?
In there, we're talking about like 56, 57, 58, and it was horrible. I mean, my mother, I hate to say this, but it was so bad on her, she attempted suicide. And I remember that very well, because I was about 10 years old, and she asked me to take this note up to grandmother's, and meaning her mother. And I didn't know what it was, but I could sense something was terribly wrong. And we were living in this apartment, and it was just her and myself and my other not younger than me, but the other brother and sister who were still at home. And like I said, I just knew something was wrong, and I just ran up to my grandmother's as fast as I could. And she lived about 3 miles away. And here she had turned on the gas in the stove. And but they did get there in time. But I just never could get over that. It's very hard for me to even think about it. But I'm sorry, I do digress here. But even though she herself had gone through such a horrible period, I don't think she grasped at that stage in life, because now we're talking 20 years later, and my father had passed away, so she no longer had that abusive situation that she was trying to escape from, domestic abuse. And I don't think she really understood the enormity of it, because she could have been anything had someone told her she should have gone to college, because she was like the #1 honor student at school, and she had a very high IQ. But because she, became a homemaker, I don't think she was in that mindset of like how damaging this was to me as a woman growing up in the 70s who was looking to support myself and not rely on marrying a man for support. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm just saying I don't think coming from the generation she didn't comprehend this new wave of women's rights and women wanting to create their own careers, not just survival jobs. So I don't think she ever grasped how painful it was for me. In a way that was very disappointing for me, and I felt hurt by it. But years later, I had to put it in perspective of what her mindset and what she grew up And then I was better able to accept that, okay, well, she just didn't understand it because her circumstances were very different from mine. She didn't grow up with women marching and wanting careers of their own, you know. So eventually it was okay. But no, I don't believe she ever grasped the enormity of it. And even then after leaving Altoona and coming to Harrisburg, I applied to York College because I wanted to get my bachelor's degree.
Now, what year would this be?
This would be 1976, 77. And York College accepted me, and I went there to finish my bachelor's degree and had some part-time jobs while I was doing that. Meaning burn security guard. I also worked part-time at a car dealer. I got through a friend in the service department just to help with expenses in college because I had to borrow money for the college. And then, so I got my bachelor's degree in 1978 in criminal justice. And I still couldn't get a job anywhere in criminal justice. I had gotten an interview to be a prison guard up at Muncie Prison, the all-women's prison, and I wasn't hired, and I was never given any explanation, even though I took the civil service test for the state, and I was like number 3 or 4. I couldn't get anything out of them, you know, as to why. So I ended up working in a totally unrelated field, which was a consumer finance company, making loans to people whose credit is not real good and therefore couldn't get loans through regular banks, and unfortunately would be charged higher rates. And I didn't like that. Ethically, I didn't like it, but I had to have income. And I worked there for about 4 or 5 years, and I decided to, well, since my criminal justice degree was worthless, essentially was worthless, and I decided to take computer classes at the community college in Harrisburg. And I took those part-time in the evening and did very well in those and got an associate degree from them. So I have the bachelor's degree, which was worthless, job-wise. And now, because I know I can't stand this consumer finance realm because I find it unethical to, you know, charge people this interest rate, and people who are behind 120 days, you call them and try to get them to take out more loans. And I mean, it just totally went against my ethics. So I did well and had a 4.0 in the computer courses. I understood it very well. I was even asked to teach the introductory course part-time at HAC. And then the professor who headed up the computer department had also gotten me my first job in the computer field, which was with the city of Harrisburg as a computer programmer. And that was probably that was 1982. And that leads into more discrimination then, and a requirement that I once again change my career. And this is how that came about. Allow me to explain. This professor, and I'm probably pretty naive, maybe I'm not now, but back then I was, because I came from a very small town. I didn't think of anybody expecting anything if they got you a job, you know, and you did well and whatever. And he was probably 50-something, a short little bald guy, and his wife, he was married. His wife lived way out in a remote area, didn't have a driver's license. He married her when she was 16 because she was pregnant, and he never let her finish high school, wouldn't give her a driver's license. But how did that all relate to me? Here, he tried to hit on me, okay, sexually. And he just wouldn't give up. He wouldn't take no for an answer. This went on for about a year, to the point where one Sunday in the summertime, on a late Sunday morning, he actually came to where I was living at the time with my then partner, female partner. And he came to the house and walked through the yard and was calling out my name, Nancy, Nancy. And her parents also lived with us, which converted the house into like a duplex, each having their own side. But her parents lived there half the year and then would go to Florida in the wintertime. So there he is, and he's not even inebriated, and I'm not even there because I had gone for a bike ride. I used to bike ride from up in Dauphin down to Shipoke quite often. And so her parents come out and say, you know, try to speak to him, and their English is not great because they were born in Finland. And they tried to explain to him that I wasn't there, and he didn't seem to understand, so my partner came out. Well, apparently he put two and two together, okay? So all of a sudden, he was saying things that I was one of those damn lesbians, man-hating lesbians, blah, 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 blah. I was no longer asked to teach up at HAC after teaching there part-time for 3.5 years. And I couldn't do anything about that because part-time is part-time. I mean, you have no rights, essentially. It's, you know, you're like an adjunct. And even though I had great student evaluations, students really gave me great evaluations, just no longer asked to teach. And I left the city of Harrisburg and to take a job with a larger company. And because there was really very little room to grow in Harrisburg. I got great experience there. But I was offered the job, and so I turned in my resignation at the city of Harrisburg, and about 3 days before I was supposed to start, I was called and told that they had to withdraw their offer. And I was never really given a reason why. And so I'm figuring this has to be because he has a lot of community connections, meeting the professor at HAC. He was the person who knew all the employers in the area and would place the computer students at HAC, would find jobs for them. So he had a lot of connections. So I didn't know what to do about that because that was a private employer. So then I went to what are they called? An employment agency that either you'll pay a fee or the employer pays a fee and they'll match you up. So I went to one of them thinking, well, maybe I can get a job this way and somehow get away from his blacklisting me because I'm a lesbian. And I worked with them for a while, and here there was a computer job in the Treasury Department of the state, okay? Now, why they weren't filling this job with civil service, I have no idea. And I didn't care at this point because I needed a job. I went to that interview. Everything went fine. You know, again, I was verbally offered the job and had a start date. And again, about 3 or 4 days before the start date, the headhunter, for lack of whatever you call them when they work at an employment agency, called me and said he was sorry. The personnel guy from Treasury said something came up in my background check and they couldn't hire me. They had to withdraw. Well, at this point, I'm pretty frustrated, and I find an attorney who will help me try to get to the bottom of this, okay? And he filed different things, filed complaints, and all sorts of things to try and get out what they were trying to do, okay? And through him doing that and forcing the issue, it came out that the whole Commonwealth of Pennsylvania employment, anywhere in the employment part of the state as the employer, they had this dossier on me that the Altoona police created, and it was like, do not hire her for anything. And again, though, there was nothing we could do about it. There was no cause of action in legal terms to bring. There really wasn't, especially since this job again went through an employment agency and not a civil service. But at least I found out that that's how extensive the Altoona blacklisting was, that I couldn't even get a job with the state in any field, whether it was the criminal justice field or whether it was computer programming. So now I have 2 careers in 2 different cities where I'm blacklisted, okay? And the one is so broad sweeping, I can't get a job with the state of Pennsylvania. So once again, I find myself having to either reinvent myself or really have a long commute. So I opted for the long commute, and I did get a computer job in York. And I worked in the computer field as a programmer analyst and a systems analyst for about a decade. And from there, I really have switched around career-wise. The commute really wore on you because it was over an hour long, because I was coming from Middle Paxton Township, which is about 10 miles north of Harrisburg. And then the employer was about 10 miles after you got off the exit from York. So it was very tiring after several years of that. So I decided to go into journalism, and I took some journalism courses at Temple Harrisburg campus. And I worked in the newspaper field for about 10 years, started at a small weekly newspaper in Middletown, and loved that experience. It was just meant for me. I mean, I just loved it. So I did, and because it was a small paper, you did everything. You did the reporting, you did editing, you did page layout, and I loved that because I like variety. But eventually, then I went to a daily paper, and they were bought out because now we're talking late 1990s. This is when a lot of papers were being gobbled up. Although newspapers weren't talking about their own, what was the word back then that was used for downsizing or whatever it was called back in the late 1990s. A lot of newspapers didn't publish their own, but they would publish about private companies, but they were being gobbled up and then a lot of them would close up. And the one that I was at, I had only been there 6 months, and they were bought out and they laid off, the new hires. So,
I thought you worked as a reporter for quite a while.
Well, I did, because I also worked.
Oh, you mean last 6 months after they got gobbled up?
Yes. And so then I ended up, believe it or not, this will be another surprise, because keep in mind the blacklisting at the state of Pennsylvania. Any Commonwealth job, any civil service job I wouldn't have gotten. Once again, there's an ad in the paper, and it had a P.O. box, and it was for a communications specialist, and blah, blah, blah. And it was rather vague, and usually I wouldn't answer ads like that because I want to know who it is that's running the ad. But I've just lost my job at the daily newspaper. Yes, I'm still with my partner, and she's financially okay with, me not having income for now because she has a good job. But I still need to get a job. And so I do answer this, and it turns out it's the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, which is not civil service. They get to hire their own people. They don't go, each party gets to. And it was the Republican, and here I am, a Democrat. And I was offered the job, and I took it. And I switched parties. I didn't feel good about that, but again, I needed a job, and I worked there for about 5 years. Until that became too much of couldn't live with myself.
What were you doing there?
Each writer, although again, they come up with big names, communication specialist. Essentially, you were a writer and you were a media liaison, meaning we would each be assigned about anywhere from 10 to 12 lawmakers. Okay, and we would do all their newsletters, we would do all the press releases and compile press packets, like when they wanted to have a press conference to announce a new piece of legislation they were going to be introducing. We would do all that and write speeches for them, all that. And it was pretty nice, except for the last few years when the dogma really started to come from way up, even outside of Pennsylvania, to the point where we were essentially being told what to write and just tailoring it a little bit. And it was like, it just churned my stomach, because it was, what can I say, it was just a lot of, at that point, you know, boilerplate stuff, and there was no longer any creative outlet in it. And then, of all things, a friend of mine said, well, you should go to law school, didn't you? You loved law. Which I ended up then thinking, gosh, I've been pushed around as it was. I guess what's one more leap of faith? Mind you, I'm about 50 now, all right? And so I do. I had a small townhouse in the Midtown section of Harrisburg, and the bank and I owned, and I put that up for sale, sold my car, sold a lot of furniture. I started out at Widener for a year and a half. I found that environment way too restrictive, and surprisingly, that would have been early 2001. I had students in the evening classes, because I went in the evening hoping to get some part-time work during the day. So we're talking more of an adult student body. I mean, not too many were my age, but they're at least in their 20s, 30s. And I start getting some classmates who are making comments about what they believe to be my sexual orientation, okay? And so that, and the fact of it was such a restrictive environment as far as you had to take courses that they said, you were dictated what courses you were going to take for the first 2 years. You couldn't have electives, you know, and that was just so confining for me intellectually. I ended up transferring out to DePaul Law School in Chicago. Graduated from there 2006, cum laude, and then worked in legal services for about 5.5 years. That's
In Chicago?
No, not in Chicago. I came back because I didn't have any family or friends out there. I just picked up and moved out there, got a studio apartment, didn't know anyone. I sold my car, my house, went out there, and while it was scary in some ways, it's probably one of the most wonderful experiences I've had in my life, because I had never done anything like that before. I mean, selling everything I have, going out to a city where I know no one, a big city. I had never been in a big city before, but I loved it because I loved all the diversity and seeing people out in Chicago who were from different countries and wearing their country's attire, not dressing just like the homogenous people here in central Pennsylvania, where we all look alike and talk alike and think alike, if people can pound our minds into conforming to their beliefs. So it was wonderful. I really loved it. And then, like I said, I worked in legal services for about 5.5 years. That's providing civil, not criminal, civil services to people who cannot afford a private attorney. So it's a very low paying job. But, and then I was kind of forced into retirement because I had to take some family medical leave. And I couldn't come back after the 12 weeks. I still wasn't ready to come back. And as you probably know, I mean, by law, they only have to hold your job for 12 weeks. And so I lost that job. And now I'm drawing my Social Security retirement, and I'm going to operate a solo practice out of my house. I'm in the process of, I already purchased the hardware, the computer and everything, and I need to just get that set up and create a website. And I have some clients now just by word of mouth, but I need to really get that up and going to supplement my retirement income from Social Security. So that's where I'm at. I know it's been a lot of jig-jagging around, but what can I say?
Well, you've given us a good long occupational and educational history, along with how your identity has impacted all of that. Let's step back again and talk about how it might have impacted the rest of your life, your social life. You're thinking about a lot of other things, your political life, that sort of thing.
Well, it did very much impact my social life and my personal life, because after the professor at HAC had discovered I was living with a woman up in Middle Paxton Township, and that got all around, all of a sudden, people who moved in about 2 or 3 years after we moved there. We bought a house in 1979. It's right next to the river, my former partner and I. She doesn't mind my using her first name, Rita. Are we okay? And, but then there's this married couple who bought a house maybe 3 years later that was about 10 houses up the road from us. And they were very good friends with this professor. And all of a sudden, the wife and a female friend of hers, who then moved in a year later to the house right next to them, who's not married, those two women decided to start harassing my partner and I. And this went on and on and on for about 2.5 years. It was unrelenting. In the summertime, my partner and I did a lot of bike riding, so we'd be coming down from Dauphin, down on the main highway in the summertime, on our bikes, going down Front Street, then Riverfront, and then on down to Shipoke. Those women would get in their cars, the two of them, would get in one of their cars. They would wait. They knew we liked to bike ride, and they would wait somewhere until we were out on that highway. And then they would get out on that highway and roll down their windows and scream, pussy eaters," to the whole world, you know. I mean, so anyone could hear, and everyone, because it's summertime and a lot of people, it's not real hot weather, so they don't have their AC on. They have their windows down, a lot of convertibles. They would throw pictures on our porch of men with erections and say, "Why don't you try this?" They went so far as to put homemade signs about as big as this half of the table at each end of the road that we lived on, homemade signs. It said, "2 lesbians at 12 River Road, nightlight, security light, wonder why." And then at the other end, the sign had said, "Open house, open lesbian house, 2 lesbians, 12 River Road." They would send mail to us addressed, not our names, 2 lesbians, and they have our house name and the street, and it would be delivered to us. Now, my partner went to the post office, which at that time was in Harrisburg, the main post office, and spoke to the head person and took that mail into him and asked, why would this ever be delivered like this? And he told her there's nothing they could do about it. It had a street address on it. It had a city, state, and zip code. They had to deliver it. He felt that it was awful, but he couldn't, there was nothing he could do about it. One other time, when they would harass us by throwing stuff, they would key our cars, they would throw eggs against our garage, which was about 100 feet. It was an unattached garage, 100 feet from the house. They would throw eggs and do all sorts of malicious mischief type of stuff. And so the one time we did call the state police on them after that, finding our car keyed for about the 3rd time. And a state trooper came and talked to us, and his response was, because we told him about that specific thing, and we both saw them do it, so we were witnesses for them having done it. We actually saw them go by and key the car. And then we also told him about the other stuff. And he said, well, don't you kind of expect this when you're 2 women living together, 2 people of the same gender? And so there was nothing we could do about that, okay? Eventually, we did file harassment charges ourselves at the district justice level. All right, and we had an attorney. They came in with an attorney and who defended them, and they lied and everything else, but one of the charges did stick. One of the harassment charges did stick. But then they appealed it and took it down to the Dauphin County Courthouse, and meanwhile, they and that professor have very good political connections down there, and all of a sudden, the thing just disappears. It's essentially whitewashed, you might as well say. And so we realize what we're dealing with. And in fact, one of the women actually made that comment to us one day when they were harassing us. She said, "You don't know who you're dealing with. I have all sorts of connections." The other incident about the harassment I need to tell is the woman who moved in next to the woman who was married, who she herself had never been married. And these women, I'd say, were about 50, in their early 50s at this time, whereas my partner and I were in our early 30s. And that woman, I was down at my garage working on my car one time. I used to change my own oil back when you could do that and they didn't make things so awkward. And she came down, and this is an afternoon in the summertime, you know, by herself. And she gets out of her car, and I'm thinking, oh my God, there's no witnesses going to be around. It's just me and her. Her first name's Emily, and again, this is all public record. She challenges me to fight her right then and there. She said, I want to whip your ass. Come on, get out from under that car right now. I want to go one-on-one with you. And I told her, I said, Emily, get in your car and leave. You know, get in your car and leave. You will not come out the better of any physical fighting you might want to get into with me. I'm a lot younger than you are. And she did finally go, and she said, this isn't the last of this. So one day I'm driving down Front Street, a work weekday, to go to work, and Emily is behind me in her car. And I thought, oh my God, you know, now what's she up to? And they didn't know exactly where I worked, okay? And I didn't want them to know. So I pulled into another place of business on Front Street. It used to be called the USF&G building up in a 3200 block. I pulled in their parking lot. And it was pretty empty because it was early mornings. I mean, there would be people coming in, but Emily followed me in there. And so her car is maybe 100, 200 feet away from mine. I stopped my car, she stopped hers. She got in her glove compartment, she got out a handgun and pointed it at me. I mean, she's sitting in her car and she pointed it at me, and I'm scared. Like, is this person that crazy that she's going to shoot me? Because one or both of them at some time had said, we'll blow your heads off, you know, during some of their escapades. And at that moment, someone came in who was going to work at USFG, and they saw it, and Emily took off, put the gun down in back and took off. I filed charges against that because I had a witness. And that was at the magistrate level, district justice level. Lo and behold, in the meantime, while we're waiting for the hearing date to be set, we ended up hiring an attorney to file a civil lawsuit against them, because at this point, I mean, after about 2.5 years of unrelenting harassment, I am having to get my doctor to prescribe medication for me because I am a nervous wreck. And I miss work. There are days I miss work because I'm just too, I mean, it was horrible. It was like living in a hell. It was awful. It was like torture. And so there was a civil suit filed. And we're still waiting for the hearing date for this incident where she pointed the gun at me, and we have a witness. Well, the hearing date kept getting postponed and postponed. It was like a year after the incident. Finally, there was a hearing date. And we contacted the witness. hoping she'd still, oh, she said, "Oh, I will never forget that day. Yes, I'll be there." So we were very lucky. So we went to the magistrate. It was up North 6th Street, Division Street, and Emily's car was already there, in her attorney's car. And we go in with our attorney and our witness, and we're expecting the hearing to take place. Well, the district justice comes out finally, you know, and where he sits, and he says, "It's my understanding that there's a civil case been filed involving this entire situation. Is that correct?" And I said, yes, there has. And I said, "But that has nothing to do with this. This is a criminal case." He says, "Well, I am saying it does have something to do with that. It's a civil case, it's filed, it covers all of this, so we are not going to entertain any criminal charges here." I don't know if those were his exact words, but he said, "We're not having a hearing, we're not having a case. Let the civil case handle it." So again, she used her connections to get, you know, there's no way. Those are two separate things. Just because you file a civil case does not mean you can't file criminal charges against somebody. And she should have been charged. I mean, pointing a gun at me like that? My God. But, so it affected our lives terribly. I mean, medically.
What happened with the civil case?
The civil case, they responded, their attorney responded, and of course deny everything. But what did happen was the harassment stopped, okay? We never went to trial, but the harassment stopped. And so it cost us about $5,000 in attorney fees. And plus, like I said, the effect it had on my health. And they did know where my partner worked, and they had sent mail to her place of employment. And she had a high up position. So any mail that comes in there is opened by administrative staff. They had sent a big manila folder with pictures of women that were nude laying on the beach, and one had long red hair, which I had long red hair at the time, and other stuff all about lesbians, you know, that they cut out of different things and just shoved all this stuff in there. And on this one picture they wrote, "Does this remind you of your lesbian lover, Nancy?" The one who was laying on the beach with the long red hair. And meanwhile, this was opened by my partner's secretary, and my partner wasn't out of work. Well, fortunately, my partner was very well respected and very well liked where she was at work, and they said, "Don't worry about this, you know, it's horrible, this happened, but if anything else comes, and for you, that looks suspicious like that, we're going to bring it directly to you. You know, not worry about it." But had they had the ability to cause her to lose that job she had, they would have, but they apparently didn't have that high up connections. But that's the extent they went to. They just tried to totally destroy our personal life. You can talk about not being able to enjoy the peace and quiet of living in your house, you know, because every time you come out, someone might be going by, one of them, and scream something at you, you know, "Hey, lesbian," or "Hey, you pussy eater," or whatever, you know. It was just horrendous. It was just a horrendous ordeal. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Well, maybe I'd wish it on those two. So they'd know what it felt like, but...
So you were probably pretty happy to sell your house after that.
Well, actually my partner and I, we were together for 20 years. In 1998, then we amicably, on a very friendly basis, I decided that a relationship wasn't working for either of us too well. And I decided to move out and get an apartment of my own, and she kept the house. And she still lives there. And this woman, one of the women, now and then harasses her. Not anything more about the gay issue, because it turns out her son is gay, and he passed away. And it was never confirmed, but there was always a question of whether he might have had AIDS or not. And I don't mean that in any critical way. I'm just saying, I think she then became very hesitant to harass people based on sexual orientation, because here she lost a son who was openly gay and lived on that street where she lived with his male partner. So my partner still has that house and still lives there, and in a way I kind of respect and admire her, because it's like saying, you know what, you did all that shit to us, and Nancy's not living here, but that's for different reasons, but you know, you did not force me out of here. You did not force me out of here. Kind of like, what's Maya Angelou say? And still I stand. No matter what you put me through, and still I stand. And I visit my partner a lot. We're very close friends. We've been friends now for 16 years, and we were together for 20 years. So we're very good friends.
Looking back now over all of that, did you have awareness of or engagement with LGBT organizations or groups in the area?
No, I really didn't, because I really wasn't aware of, because this harassment now that I'm talking about that happened where we lived up in Middle Paxton Township in Dauphin took place between, I'd say, 1984 and up to about half of 1986. And neither one of us were aware of any organizations, you know, because we weren't ourselves out. I mean, like, I wasn't out at any of my places of employment. She wasn't. I mean, we didn't go to the extent of pretending we were straight. We didn't put pictures of people that we claimed were our husbands or boyfriends. We didn't do that, but we let people think what they think. We never confirmed or denied. So we weren't aware of anything. There was one bar we used to go to, but I never remember anything being on the bulletin board. At the entrance inside the bar, they had a, corked bulletin board where people could put stuff. I never remember noticing anything about different organizations.
You showed me a picture of your getting married. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes. We met in 1977, and we met at that bar that was on Front Street. It was called D-Gem. It's now, it's been several different things. The building's still there, but it's now some with a big deck on it. It used to be Morgan's Place, and now it's Big Woody's or something like that. And we very much fell in love. And so we decided we wanted to, she lived in an apartment in Mechanicsburg at that time, and we decided we wanted to live the rest of our lives together. And we wanted some recognition of that. So we somehow found out about the Metropolitan Community Church. And we found out that the one in Baltimore would perform a ceremony. You had to go and meet with that person. You had to, and we did. We went and met with the minister, and you had to show different things that you've been together for X amount of time. I think it was at least a year. And things that showed that your relationship was more. And then we had to wait. I think it was 2 or 3 months, and then come back. And then he would perform the ceremony, because he wanted to make sure. And our friends, we had just a small little congregation. This is of the people that she was renting from, because she was gay herself. So there were about 8 of us, including myself and my partner. We went in my partner's car. She had a little bright yellow Toyota Celica. And I say this, it'll make sense why I'm saying it. So we're driving down 83, down to Baltimore to go through this ceremony of a civil union, which incidentally, the certificate itself, surprisingly, says Holy Union, which we never realized till we got it out to donate it to this project. But so we're going down 83 in the summertime, nice sunny day, and then Cheryl, who was the landlord, and about 5 other people, they're coming in Cheryl's car to come down to. And while we're in there and having the ceremony, here they had tied cans to the car, to Rita's car, and wrote "just married" on the, the windshield, just like you would do for a straight couple. And it was fun. I mean, nobody seemed to be bothered by it. As we drove back to Mechanicsburg from Baltimore, it was very obvious we were two women, and nobody gave us the finger or anything. So that was a pleasant experience. And we had Cheryl had gotten us a small wedding cake, and we had a little reception, and it was a very, very good time.
This was what year?
This was 1978, May 27, 1978 was the date.
This is at the same time you're living out at the...
No, we're not living there yet. It's a year later. After our ceremony, we went looking for a house then.
I gotcha.
And then it was a year later, we moved into a house that we bought up in Middle Paxton Township, right next to the river. So that was a good thing. And because I do feel the need to point out something that was positive during that 2.5 years of horrendous harassment by those women. This place where we live, River Road, when we moved there in 1979, mostly had older people living there, white homogenous couples, Christian couples, who you could tell were very basic, go to church on Sunday, whatever. And despite these two women harassing us and telling and screaming and telling, making sure every neighbor along that road knew that we were lesbians, people on that road, several of them stood up for us in the sense that, we were welcomed over to their house when they had picnics and summer holidays with their children and their grandchildren. Another older couple, their son was giving them a special anniversary for their 50th anniversary, and it was out of one of the fancy places, Out 22. Can't remember the name of it, but it's fancy and expensive. So he limited their guests to, you can invite 25 people. Now, they only knew us for 5 years or so, but we were among the 25 people they invited. And so that was a very positive thing amidst all that ugliness, that the neighbors stood up for us. And one neighbor one time even came out of her house and shouted at those two, "Why don't you leave those girls alone, you bitches?" So, I mean, I did want to note that because we were all very surprised. I mean, my partner and I were surprised pleasantly because, again, these were people who were going to church on Sunday, who were you would think would have been horrified to be told that, hey, there are two lesbians living here on the road. And they just didn't care.
Great. So. What have I missed?
I don't think.
What changes have you seen?
Oh my gosh, well, wow, as you can imagine, I never, ever imagined to see things. I never imagined that in my lifetime I would still be alive and gay marriage would be enacted. Okay. And especially in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, of all states, even when the Supreme Court struck down that part of DOMA last year or a year or 2 years ago, as states started doing things, I figured, Pennsylvania will be the last. I'll be dead and gone. I won't know because they'll dig their heels in. But they weren't. I think they were, the 16th state? So the changes are tremendous for me to, after all I went through, to see now that this type of progress is absolutely mind-boggling and wonderful. I'm so glad to see it. So glad to see that, the progress that's being made and that people are being treated same as anyone else.
What have I missed?
I don't think we've missed anything, really. I'm very happy about this project. I think this is an important project. I think because it's easy, and this is probably true of all civil rights movements, probably with minorities, African Americans, the women's rights, and now the gay rights. Because once you do make so much progress and there's a lot of acceptance, it's easier for the next generation to forget what all happened to previous people, what all a lot of people lost in that. I mean, my having to switch careers and start over at entry-level salaries and have periods of unemployment, needless to say, adversely impacted my Social Security retirement greatly. The financial harm was tremendous. One thing I do want to add, if I can put in here, my second partner, this is before I moved to Harrisburg, she had a young daughter who was 3-4 years old. She was a single mother. Her aunt and uncle, who lived down here in Cumberland County on the West Shore, when they found out that she was having a lesbian relationship with another woman, they filed for custody. So this was the child's great aunt and uncle. And this would have been 1973, 74. And do you know, back then, that custody was given to them. And the partner I had back then, she was allowed visitation, supervised visitation. And those are the things, I guess, that another reason why I think this project's so important, because people have lost their homes, lost their jobs, people have lost children in custody matters, and we've made all this wonderful progress, but I think it's important to preserve, what a lot of people had to go through for us to get here where we are today. A lot of battle scars. But we survived.
I'll just ask that question one more time. Anything else?
I think that's pretty much covers it. And now I'm, despite all I've been through, I'm at peace with things now. I say, hey, what I went through was
That's
ugly.
fabulous.
I wouldn't wish it on anybody, but I'm at peace, and I just want to enjoy whatever amount of time I have left on this earth, and now I don't care. Who knows? I'm gay, and I put the rainbow sticker on my car. Whatever. I don't care now. I'm really
Well,
at
and you're
peace.
associated with the project.
Yeah.